So am I free to go? Am I free to talk?
No, not now. I will
Okay.
introduce it and then I'll let you know when it's a good time.
Okay.
Good evening and welcome to the Grace Talk. I am Gloria Godson. Thank you for joining us. Today, we are continuing the dialogue that we started about 4 weeks ago on racial justice, equality, and reconciliation in America. We have already addressed very important topics in our ongoing dialogue, and the whole purpose is to promote empathy, to promote understanding, to build bridges, and to look for credible solutions. Today, we are going to focus on workplace inequality. Should Black people have the same rights as white people to the pursuit of happiness in America? Should they have the same rights to be able to strive for, achieve, and enjoy the American dream? What is the gap between the theory of what I just said and the practice and the reality? And how can we close that gap? That's what we're talking about today. I must warn you, particularly that from, our white brothers and sisters, that from here on out, the conversation is going to get a little tougher. Why do I say that? So far, we have been arguing for the right of the Black man and woman to be able to breathe. We are now going to get into areas of inequities and areas of equality. And I can tell you that sometimes it's a little harder for some people to get beyond that. What I mean is there are some people who agree with the right of it, Black people to, the right to life. But when you get to the right to have the opportunity to earn a decent wage, when you get to the right to be able to drive a good car, live in a good neighborhood, some people begin to struggle there, particularly if that Black person has more than they do, even if he works hard or she works hard for what she has. So I want to set the tone, and I ask you to please, all our white brothers and sisters, we ask you to please continue to stand with us. Don't walk away. Stay with us as we begin to engage this topic. Once again, we have a distinguished panel, and oh, do we have a distinguished panel for you today. And I'm going to call them in alphabetical order. But before we do that, we want your engagement. We want you as our audience to engage with us, make comments, ask questions, and join the conversation. So who do we have on your panel today? First is Mike Ancona. Mike is a US Navy submarine veteran, 30-year professional in electric power generation, and he is currently the operations manager at a power station in Philadelphia. The next is Jay Cofield. Jay is a minister here in Wilmington. And Dr. Darrell Jones. Dr. Jones is an associate pastor at New Destiny Fellowship Church in Wilmington. He is also the founder of the Emmanuel Assembly Bible Academy, and Darrell holds 2 master's degrees and a PhD degree. Next is Dr. Bill Nordy, also another PhD holder. Bill is the interim CEO and COO of Connections Community Support Programs. Connections is the largest nonprofit here in the state of Delaware, and I have the privilege of being a member of their board of directors. So, Bill, you're welcome to our show. And Michael Piles is an accountant from Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and he has an MBA. And Rick Udicious, again, my brother and friend, who has worked in the scientific engineering field for over 30 years. And Eric Williams. Eric played for the Dallas Cowboys. And by the way, Eric, I was a fan when I lived in Texas. For the Dallas Cowboys, 3-time Super Bowl champion, was selected multiple years as All-Pro and to the Pro Bowl. And recently, Eric was inducted to the Black College Football Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Eric. And the gentlemen, welcome to our show. All right, we have been talking about a Black person's right to breathe in America. Well, last week, in an article about race and income inequality, the New York Times said that dollars are like air and crucial to vitality. And when it comes to wealth, Black Americans have less at nearly every juncture of life, from birth to death. My question to you is, why is that? Who wants to start? Dr. Nordy, you want to start?
Economics is not one of my strong suits, but I am sort of a data dork and listen to a lot of podcasts about economics. So I guess the issue is because wealth or the attainment of wealth not only happens on the individual level, but also happens intergenerationally. The less money that and access that people of color have to resources and to opportunities basically limits their future options that are going on. And so it happens across the lifespan, from not having access to quality education, which then impacts their ability, people's ability to be able to go to schools and post-secondary education, which then limits opportunities for jobs. And so it's a vicious cycle. And I guess the question for policymakers, not for me, is how do you interrupt that cycle, or how do you assist people in being able to generate wealth? And there's a long history of segregation and discrimination around housing, which is where a lot of people get their wealth is by having a home, being able to pass that home on to other people in the future generations. So I think it's a long-standing issue and has been exacerbated over time.
For someone who doesn't have economics as your strong suit, I think you did pretty good. Dr. Jones, do you have anything you want to chime in there? Go right ahead.
I do. I think we have to remember when we go back to the very beginnings of the presence of African Americans in this country, 1619, beginning in 1619, it was never the vision for persons of African descent, African Americans, to share in the wealth of the nation. We were here to serve the economy. And in fact, we were important reasons why the economy, American economy, grew. So we were here to serve the economy, but not to benefit from the economy. And so when we look at history, beginning with the slavery period, as we move through Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, and so forth, it has never been the aim for us as a people to share in the wealth of the country. And in fact, there were conscious, deliberate efforts to see to it that we did not. And that legacy, going back to slavery, is still with us, and why we have the disparities we do.
Thank you, both you and Dr. Nordy. Dr. Nordy really put his thumb on many of the issues, talking about, it's not just confined to one area. It starts very early in access to education, good quality education, and then it just snowballs from there and continues to persist as those inequalities are deepened and in a structure that Dr. Jones just talked about was created intentionally for that. Jay, what thoughts do you have about this?
I agree both wholeheartedly with Dr. Nordy and Dr. Jones. It's a reality to me that African Americans, in fact, weren't brought here to benefit from the economy, but brought here to serve the economy. And I believe that we have never overcome that purpose. I mean, it's been a continual struggle from the very onset, and the gap still exists. So we know we've never truly overcome that struggle as a people.
Mike and Kona, what thoughts do you have? I know that you actually do have a story that happened to you at work. This is a little related to this, right?
I guess sort of. You know, I'm listening to these gentlemen speak, and I will tell you right now that this is a little outside my strike zone per se, because I am not a college degree person. I graduated high school barely, joined the Navy. The Navy taught me a skill set. I got out of the Navy and entered an entry level job where I was part of a company where there was like a pay structure. And that has kind of been my work experience. And I have, you know, climbed up to the highest levels of an hourly employee. And then I got into management. And in the business that I'm in, at least at the level that I have attained, there seems to be pretty much equality, because I've worked for companies. You just can't fundamentally pay one guy one thing and some guy something else. I mean, you'll never be able to do that. My experience is limited to just what I saw in my limited view, but I will say that I have worked in plants where there have been no Black people working there and a substantial amount of Black people working there in different environments. And what I can tell you is I know from watching it that the Black guys, they basically gotta be better just to be considered the same. That I saw that. I mean, it was like, when you gotta be, you just being the average guy over there, you will not be looked at as being like, oh, you're okay. You got to be better than okay. And I saw that firsthand in my experiences coming up the ranks. And it's, you know, the story in particular you talk about, which maybe this isn't exactly the right time, but I'll tell you an example of the way that just the bias exists against the Black man in the workplace.
Thank you. We will come back there and pick up on your story. And of course, gentlemen, feel free if you have a story of your own that's relevant. I know that I personally have tons of stories. I can tell you a whole hour to tell stories. For someone who, my training is in law, I'm an attorney. And by the grace of God, I rose through leadership positions to be a corporate vice president in the largest energy company in the country. So I know discrimination. I've seen so many faces of it. And I can tell you, fill up hours telling you the different flavors and faces of discrimination. And for me, it's multi-layered. I'm not a man, I'm a woman, and I do have an accent. So there are many layers of discrimination that I have faced to be at a corporate vice president level, and again, the largest energy company in the country. So I know discrimination and the different flavors of it, but this is not about me. Let's go to you, Michael. What are your thoughts about this question?
Sorry, unmuted. I'm unmuted now. So I think what just crossed my mind was, as an idea, could employers, when you apply for a position, whether it's on Zip Recruiter, whether it's on Indeed, why can't the position a response back from the employer or be advertised as this position entails A, B, and C? And as we all know, every job entails more than A, B, and C. It's D through Z sometimes, but they should put the wage of the or the salary of the position out there out front. It's $50,000 a year, it's $100,000 a year, etc. This way, when the person applies for the job and they want the position, well, we already said it's 50,000. There's no big mystery. That's what the position is going to start at. And then from there, if you do a good job, then you can get your incremental wages, your incremental increases. But I think it's just leads to, it can lead to just the disparity of wages if you just have someone coming in and just negotiating what their wages, because maybe the person that they're interviewing with, the hiring manager, is partial to women. Suppose they're partial to white men, they're going to want to give that person more money. So and I don't think that's very fair. I mean, so but that's how I feel. That's my view. I think that's worth looking into.
Thank you, Michael. Michael is actually beginning to broach an issue, and Rick, if you want to chime in here, I can let you in. But let me ask a question that I think is right on what Michael has has pointed out. And the Economic Policy Institute reported in February of this year that the Black-white wage gap is significantly wider now than it was in 2000. And the data shows not only rising inequality through the 2000s, but also the persistence of that wage gap, and in some cases, the worsening of it. The report notes that this inequality persists even for Black people with advanced degrees. And so what I think Michael is saying is that one way to address that is to put the salary out there upfront so that everybody knows what it is. And so that limits the ability to pay people more than others. I think, Michael, is that what you're saying?
Yes, very generally, yeah. Just put it out there and then stick to it. Have the employers adhere to what they're putting out there. Well, we told you in the beginning it's 50,000. We told you it's 100,000. So we don't negotiate on that. If you do good at the end of the year, we can give you an incremental bonus. So I mean, then there can be favoritism there, of course, but from the start, it should be on equal footing. I mean, that's the position.
Yeah, if you're equally qualified, you should be paid the same thing. Rick, I'm going to invite you again. You can comment either on the beginning discussions or this one. What do you have any thoughts around the topic that we're discussing right now?
Well, what I'm going to say is probably going to hopefully give everyone on the panel hope, because the experience I've had, not the PhD level like some of the guys on the panel, only have a bachelor's degree. And most of my career, I've been with one company, 34 years. And this company, I've been working alongside PhD people. So I kind of understand what it is to be the working from having to prove yourself every day kind of thing. But honestly, I can truly say if God wasn't with me on this and didn't show me favor with that at work, not because of my race, but because of he's my God and I'm his son. Honestly, I would not have gotten to where I am today, which I'm not leading anything, but I'm a senior engineer. I was a scientist and I moved over to the engineering portion of the group. This is an international company. And I want to tell you, the CEO just had an announcement with the entire company. And the first point he made, and this is a town hall meeting, he said, Black lives do matter. And he said, we will, without any exception, have equal footing for everyone in this company. And this is an international company. They're in 80 countries in the world, 60,000 employees. And I've seen people of color in every arena, in engineering, in science, and I've seen equal treatment. I'm not them, so I can't say every single thing like Gloria's experiencing. I'm sure they've experienced some of that as well. But what I've seen and the way I've treated has been that equal. And I work for a company I'm proud to say does that. So there is hope. I'm sure there's a lot of companies that are not doing it right, but people are realizing and people are striving to get there.
Thank you, Rick. Sorry, go ahead.
That's all I can say on that.
No, that's fine. I can tell you one of the things that's really refreshing in this current environment is exactly what you said. I open any email now from any company, and the first thing you say is we support the Black community. So this is a new thing, but it's a welcome thing. My only prayer and the thrust of this conversation is that it doesn't stop there. It doesn't stop in the fist bump. I opened an email from a company that I've been, doing business with them, but I've never seen it until today. There's a fist bump saying we support, the Black community, Black Lives Matter. So that's really great, but that's just the threshold. That's the beginning point. That awareness, that collaboration, that sensitivity that, okay, yes, we see you, we understand where you are. So that's a great place to be, and I'm grateful to hear that. We are going to come to you, Eric. You played in the Dallas Cowboys. How is life? How was life there? And obviously the Colin Kaepernick story that happened, 2016, and how, that played out and all the opposition. And look now, 4 years later, the country is embroiled in this fiasco. Should they have listened in 2016? What are your thoughts on this point, Eric? Eric, we can't hear you. I think you're mute. We can hear you. Okay, I'm going to transition away from Eric because it sounds like we can't hear him. Eric, can you hear us now? All right, we will move away from Eric and come back. Continuing. Eric, can you hear us? Yes, go ahead. We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I said thank you for the introduction, and to God be the glory.
Yes.
When it comes to the Colin Kaepernick kneeling protest movement, first of all, anybody in their right mind that has been following the Colin Kaepernick protest knows and realizes that it was not about disrespecting the flag. Upon further review, Colin Kaepernick the protest was about racial injustice, police brutality, and systematic oppression. Okay? I believe that the protest was not perceived well by the NFL. The NFL is all about the bottom line. And if it does not make dollars, it does not make sense concerning the NFL. The NFL is a league that sits back and waits to see how everyone else will respond to a crisis. And then they will react and go with the flow.
Yeah. Thank you. That is quite insightful. And the truth is, while I was shaking my head in response to you, I also thought the same thing about the church. There was hardly any church that spoke up. You know, there were churches where, how did they say it, waiting for all the facts. And I remember pondering to myself, what kind of scenario, is there any scenario in the world where what we saw would be good? Any facts could explain, you know, the killing of this man in front of us until his whole life drained out of him. What are you waiting for? But it's not just the NFL. Most churches did not speak up until later on. I didn't know why. And it really baffles me because there's no explanation there's no scenario where what we saw would be okay or right, regardless of what the facts were, whatever he did. But, you know, again, there were very few. I think there was just one minister I know who spoke up before all the facts became available. So it's not just the NFL. We have bigger problems in other places. Now, gentlemen, let's dive in a little bit deeper. And if you have any comments at any time, you know, chime in and let me know. According to an analysis of 2018 census data by the Center for Poverty and Social Policy, Black families with a new baby have a median household income of $36,000 and change. For white families, it was more than twice as much, about $80,000. So Black families start out from way behind and then never really catch up throughout life. And again, Dr. Bale already Dr. Nordy began to speak about that. My question is, how can we close that gap? Michael gave us one of the suggestions, you know, when you put out a job, put out how much you're going to pay for that job. And at least that way there's transparency about the the salary, and again, so people is measurable and people can ask for equality in that regard because they know what the pay structure is. Dr. Nordy, I'm going to come back to you. You did such a good job at the first time. I want you to kick this one off again. How can we solve this? How can we close that gap? You identified what the problem is. Do you have any thoughts right now towards a solution?
Well, going back and we are at Connections trying to work on creating salary scales that are equitable and consistent across the board, but they're scales. So you're going to have people at the lower end and the top end. The other thing, I don't know if there's any data on African-American and whites regarding salaries, but there is data that shows that women are more like, the reason for the male-female pay gap is women are more likely to accept the first offer and men are more likely to negotiate for more money. So there's this piece there that's going on about, it's one thing to hire somebody and say, this is the salary range. But if you have somebody who you really want to work for you and they're saying, I need this salary, and you're saying, I really want this person, and they have another offer, then sometimes you end up negotiating for a higher salary. Now, whether that is inherently discriminatory against either women or people of color, people won't look at it at that time. They're just trying to get that person, and not until you go back and look at, and I've done this in with some of our positions where we have these very wide differences in salary, and I can't always figure out why it is that somebody's making, $5, $6 more an hour than somebody else in the exact same position. And so it does take some work to be able to have the information. We have 1,200 employees. It's hard to really know until you have the data and the ability to access that information, if there is any systemic issues around people being discriminated against or given different treatment based on salaries. And again, and it goes back, I think the wage gap piece as well is the rich are getting richer. And because African Americans are overrepresented in the lower income brackets, that's where that pay gap is showing up again. That's why you're seeing that it hasn't made any change in the last 20 years. So I think part of it is awareness. Part of it is companies having to actually look at their data and say, did we inadvertently, because of systemic racism, make some choices or make some decisions or put things in place that did, again, disadvantage people of color?
No, thank you, Bill. You put your finger on a couple of things again that I think are really insightful. One is that some of this, yes, could be attributable to racial, inequality or injustice. But another part of it is the confidence that a person has to say, I am worth more and I'm going to negotiate for more. And unfortunately, sometimes the African Americans who come to the table are desperate. They need a job. And so the likelihood is that they will accept whatever is offered to them. Second of all, they don't have that confidence to say, I'm going to negotiate for more. And so they lose out, and they settle for lower ends. And absolutely, what you're saying is right. And it's something that we can take into account. Again, it goes back to that whole cycle starting from the beginning. I'm going to ask you to chime in there, Mike. Any thoughts about this? How do we engage this issue to make it better?
That is a very good question. Again, you're asking, this is data, and the question just on its face, I don't have enough information to speak from a data point of view. But I will give you what I would tell anybody, any young person that is coming up, entering the workforce, regardless of what race he would be, I would give the same advice to young people starting out. There are some proven keys that will give you a platform to succeed, that will put you on better footing to succeed. And there are some proven keys that will put you in a platform that makes it harder to be successful. If in this country, if you get married and stay married, you put yourself on a firmer platform for success. Most of the guys I know along my working life that had financial issues and weren't never making enough money and stuff, they all had a very similar track record of broken families and maybe multiple marriages and stuff like that. So I can tell you that is not a good place to find yourself if you want economic freedom. If you don't want to be married, then don't get married. But if you get married, it is incumbent and it is advantageous for you to stay married and provide for your family. And I think that's good advice regardless of what color you are. I think that is just solid advice. Another thing I can tell you is, when you do get a chance, when you do get whatever opportunity you're going to get, you got to work hard, and you got to give that employer everything you got all the time. And I would tell that to anybody. You work for this guy or this woman, this company, you give them everything you got. You give them excellence all the time over a long period of time. And then when you look back at your career, that excellence will pay out. I guarantee it. I know that there's injustice out there. I can't speak to all of that. My world experience is limited to kind of my life. But what I can say is that if you stay grounded with your family, work hard, take advantage of the opportunities that present itself to you, be confident, those things will translate to success. I don't know if I'm giving you the answer that you want to hear, but that's what I would have to offer anybody who asked me that question. Well, what do I got to do to make it? Well, this is what I would say you have to do to make it. This is what I've seen work.
No, thank you, Mike. There's no particular answer that I'm looking for. What we're looking here is collectively joining hands to hear your experience and see where we go from here, what the solutions are. And what you're saying is that, having broken homes and multiple marriages pose a problem. Obviously, first of all, you may have many children to support. You may have all kinds of alimony and things like that to pay. And that can put a little dip in your income. And also at some levels in corporate America, it's nice, if you will. It's expected to have some, to be in a marriage relationship, to rise to some level. So it's definitely and obviously hard work, but we're going to come to that because some of the things that you said earlier as well, plays in here, and we will get back to talk about that. Because you started out saying that, yes, of course, you've been in environments where a Black person has to work twice as hard to get in the same place. So we will come back to working hard, because working hard is good. But as you know, and as many of us know, working hard for Black people may not be the same as working hard for white people. So let's go to you, Dr. Jones. What do you think?
Yeah, I think your question, Gloria, is trying to get at how could a Black household access higher wages? And one way, well, there's a dependency on the employer as far as that goes. They have to offer greater wages, and things have changed. I'm old enough to remember the time, particularly for a small business, where the greatest asset of that company was the employee. And what they would do was take the profits that were made and funnel it back down to the employees in the form of wages and benefits. One of the motives was that business did not want to lose that employee to another company, but keep that person for their entire working life. I remember that. But things have changed to now the most valued asset, certainly of a corporation, is not the employee, it's the CEO, it's the upper management, and it's the investors. And so now when profits are generated, those dollars are funneled to upper management salaries and dividends to investors, and not the employee. And that has affected the kind of wages the employee brings into the home. So that's on the employer end. Now on the employee end, there are things we can do. And one of the arguments that have been made that could help us access greater wages would be improved education. That the more education we have, we at least increase the chances of earning better dollars. This was certainly the argument, again, throughout our history. Once we were freed from being slaves, where it was illegal for us to read or write, one of the most important things to us as a people was now to get an education. And that became one of the important paths to independence and self-worth and a path to empowerment. And that debate also waged between, you might remember, Booker T. Washington and W.E. Du Bois. They made the argument that what was important was education. They differed in what kind of education. Booker T. Washington would say, you know, industrial education, working with your hands was the important thing. W. Du Bois would say, well, your mind, intellect. He formed what he called the talented 10th, wanted to educate a 10th of the Black population to be intellectuals and so forth. But both of them agreed that it's education, two types of education, but to access greater dollars, improve skills, greater education. The other thing I would add to that is self-employment. And that's another way to increase your earning potential. It's riskier, but it raises the ceiling on your earning potential. So education and self-employment are at least two ways that we can improve our possibilities of increased salaries.
Thank you. Very good comments there. I will jump to you, Jay. What do you have any thoughts around this?
Actually, I do. As I listen to what was offered, I believe all the elements presented they need to come together to make change for us as Black people. I know you're not just saying, correct me if I'm wrong, how do we just increase our dollar, but more so, how do we close that wage gap?
Yes.
And I believe that has its roots in disclosure, as Michael had mentioned. You know, not only do you need to know what a job may pay, but to know what jobs exist. You know, I know I can speak for my own self. Moving from Philadelphia to Delaware, I experienced being held back in grade school. And I couldn't understand how I could be held back and not be failing any courses from where I came from. But the curriculum that I was, you know, taking in Philadelphia didn't meet the criteria of the school that I transferred to in Newcastle, Delaware. I've also even recently experienced it with my wife. My wife's a teacher in one of the higher rated school districts in Delaware. And at the end of their school year, the books that they had for the past year or so, they throw away. When other districts are lacking, you know, school material, they don't have books that are dated the right way in the inner cities of Wilmington, I should say, or Delaware or any other inner city. I believe that until we have information be disclosed to us, paired with the right form of education, we'll never close the gap, because we'll only ever choose to do those things that are real to us, the things that we see, you know, as steps to be successful, as Mike was mentioning, things that he saw as steps to be successful. That's all he could offer, is what he saw. And I can say for us, as Black youth, we idolize those like Eric Williams. We see him, and that's a hero. That's a mark to go towards for success. We don't know the steps necessary to become the person that could afford to pay an Eric Williams. And I think that only comes through full disclosure and the right form of education.
Thank you. That's a good point. Not just to be looking forward to be an employee, but how do you become that employer? How do you build wealth? And Bill mentioned that as well, generationally. White people have been able to do that, and home ownership is one of the ways that you do that. But in fact, I didn't put that in here, but one of the other latest research is showing that Black people are way back again, in fact, falling behind in home ownership. I didn't send that to you, but these are all researches that are out there showing that. And if you don't have that, you can't pass it on. And so white people can inherit houses, they can inherit things from their families, which continues that wealth gap between white and Black families. And Dr. Jones talked about education, and of course, I completely agree. I came from a family where the question was not whether you will get a degree. The question is how many degrees you were going to get. So that was not, but the only difficulty is as you begin to think about that, Dr. Jones, is that comes with student debt, which is another layer of burden that, you know, there's a huge disparity for African Americans. Again, I encourage you to read the data out there. The more I read of this, the more appalling it is to me. And there's just a cry in my heart. How can we get over this? Because many of those who try to get an education are saddled with debt. They have predatory lenders who take advantage of them, and it just goes or it snowballs from there. Michael, do you have any thoughts around this point?
Yeah, I was going to touch on before what Daryl Jones was saying about we gotta have to get more education, especially Black men, just to generalize, to go broad on it. But so many guys coming up think they're going to be in the NFL and the NBA, and there's nothing wrong with that, but don't have that as just your only plan. And to put on a personal level, my nephew is he's 21 now. I think that's what he wanted to be a football player. It's nothing, but you have to have another plan. So you have to take initiative on yourself to educate yourself more. And even as an athlete, you still have to have education because you're going to be making deals. You have to know what's presented in front of you. You can rely on a lawyer, but the lawyer is going to tell you what's kind of in his interest or her interest as well. So you have to get more educated, and especially Black males. We have to do better generally. Not everybody, but generally we have to.
Absolutely, we need to commit. So again, all of you're hearing for us is one thing to say, oh, the system is holding me back. And even with that, you can, you know, apply yourself, you can distinguish yourself, you can do the work that's necessary to, you know, get educated. I know that there are still barriers, but at least let's begin to do our part as well as we confront these barriers. And I'm trusting God as this conversation evolves within the country, that those barriers will begin to come down more and more as legislation and light is shed on it. Rick, any thoughts about this? How to close this gap?
I really see and believe that the companies that aren't doing it right, they're just not going to do well. Plain and simple. Companies that are doing it the right way, and I'm not just talking about the company I'm working for, but the companies that are doing it right, they're doing it God's way. They're doing it the way God would prefer it to be done, which is we're all created in his image. We're all created in his likeness. Therefore, we should all be treated the same. That's just basic sense of from the word of God itself. And when people respect each other, everybody benefits, not just the people that weren't respected before, but everybody benefits. And I just wanted to speak to that part about you're saying to educate yourselves. I wouldn't just also rely on a degree for your education. Like I said, I only have a bachelor's degree. I learned everything I've learned by asking, by seeking, by talking to people, connecting with people. You would be amazed to know how many people want to tell you what they know. They're not trying to hold it in. It used to be that way when I first started working, that there was so many people protecting, and those are the people that don't usually stay around very long. I've seen them come and I've seen them go. Why? Because they had the wrong mentality. Don't worry about those people. They don't want to help you. They don't want to talk to you. They don't want to teach you anything. There's lots of people that will. I'm one of those. I like to mentor people because you know what? If you've been given something, the best thing you can do with that is to give it away, because that's how you basically grow fruit. You don't grow fruit by holding everything in. You grow fruit by planting seeds, by putting it out there. And you end up getting more back than you even gave out. That's the amazing thing about it. So I would encourage, because we have the internet now with all kinds of information. People ask me questions all the time. Do you know this? Do you know that? I pick up my phone. I said, hold on. Let's see what we got. Yep, here's your answer. You don't have to be a genius to know a lot of things. You just have to be hungry to know. Whatever area you're interested in, dig in with everything you've got and find out what you need to find out. And if you're looking for a job, research the company. If it's not a company that's doing things right, you don't even want to start to go there. Why do you want to spend your energy and time with a company that's not doing it right? Research the company. You can find out a lot about a company on the internet right now. And lastly, I would say this is, I think that was actually it. Well, you know, educate yourself through the internet and looking for a job. Just go ahead and look at the people you want to work for, because there is choices, and God will open doors no man can open. You know what I mean? Don't think you're limited. Oh, the last thing I was going to say, entrepreneurship. We are in a country where that's possible. Somebody mentioned that earlier, and God will open that door for you to do that. But hone your skill first before you go there. You don't want to go too early, and even get mentors that can help you to become that business owner. That's all I got to say.
No, thank you, Rick. Very good point. Jade, were you itching to get in there? I wasn't sure if you were wanting to chime in there. I saw you. That's okay if I misspoke. I thought I saw you trying to chime in. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, Jay, I'm sorry.
I was appreciating what Rick was mentioning in terms of finding an individual that's willing to teach you, you know, something that you want to know, not just relying on a degree per se, but learning in the environment that you're in. And I can speak to that to some degree. For me, my experience was a little different. It is a little different in my workforce, where most of the older people or senior people on that workforce do have the fear of being replaced by a younger employee. And I've noticed, you know, in my own personal experience, the older white guys that I work with were more free to give off the knowledge that they had, almost as if they had no reservation or fear of me coming for their position. But the older black guys almost feel as though I had to learn it the hard way. You learn it on your own, because they recognize just how disposable they may be in their position, and they protect their position instead of raise another person up to take their own position.
Absolutely.
Gloria, if I might jump in, the gentleman that Rick, I think it's Rick, yeah, who spoke earlier, he's right, that we ought to love each other, and we all should be treated fairly, equally in the workplace. But what he was saying starts to get at the substance of why you're holding this conversation. It doesn't play out that way. It certainly is the ideal. It's certainly what it should be, but it's not the reality. And what we want to do is to get at why that's the case. What's the problem that is holding back the very thing you're talking about? What's the ideal that's encoded in the Declaration of Independence? What was Dr. King's dream? What is creating the problem that we're having a problem getting there? And I think this gets at the substance of why we're having this conversation.
No, absolutely, Dr. Jones. And in fact, one of the comments that we got said exactly that. It says, unfortunately, Rick, that is not what is happening. Too many companies out there are not doing the right thing, and they're still making tons of money. So our audience is definitely raising that issue that, yes, what Rick says is the way it should be, but that there's a huge gap between the reality, the practice, and the theory. Unfortunately, that's the reality of where we are. I'm going to ask you, Eric, do you have any thoughts on this issue?
When it comes to disparity and equality and race in the NFL, I must say that there are one too many prejudices. The NFL has disparities when it comes to coaching, especially head coaching jobs. How many black head coaches do you see on the sideline every Sunday during the course of an NFL game? There are disparities when it comes to management and ownership in the NFL. Oh, yeah. How many owners do you see in the NFL? Most NFL owners are white. There are disparities even when you participate in the NFL Combine. I compared the NFL Combine to the New York Stock Exchange on Wall Street, when African Americans were the first stocks and bonds to be traded and sold on the New York Stock Exchange as slaves. There were disparities, in the locker room. There were disparities when the team traveled, but nobody says anything about it. There are disparities when we have meals together. The white guys sit with the white and the black guys sit with the black. So, this is something that's been going on for a long time, and now it's time to speak up and speak out about it.
Thank you, Eric. Again, gentlemen, we are having such good conversation, but the time never cooperates. Like I told you, I don't like to go past the 1 hour mark, but this is very important conversation. We are going to continue. One last quick question, and I'm going to ask you just 1 minute each, because Mike, we've kind of been talking about it and around it. We have tons more questions that we need to delve into. But
excuse me, I'm sorry, but I have to leave because I have other previous engagements, but I really appreciate the time that was allotted to me to speak about what's going on in the world today. And I just thank you, and God bless you, and God bless everyone that's on the call. And I just appreciate it. And I thank you.
Thank you, Eric. We've also appreciated your perspective that you brought to us. Okay. And like I said, I was a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. So what can I say?
I owe you a jersey.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you guys take it easy.
Thank you. Guys, as we begin to round up today, let's kind of dive into one of the behavioral questions. We still have some of our substantive questions, but we kind of talked a little bit about it. Why is it that Black people have to prove themselves over and over again in the workplace, whereas a white person is assumed to be smart and competent? A Black person with the same education is automatically assumed to be incompetent. Dr. Bill and I had a little bit of a conversation around this. So Dr. Bill, I'm going to ask you to kind of chime in here and let us hear where your thoughts are.
So when I read that question, I struggled with some of the presumptions that were baked into it. And it got me thinking about it. And so I sort of rephrased the question a little bit about what creates the feeling and experience of many people of color, particularly African Americans, that they have to prove themselves over and over again in the workplace, whereas there is a perception or belief that white people are presumed to be more competent or intelligent relative to Black people when it comes to experience and education with similar backgrounds. And, the piece of it is I think, again, I can only speak as a white male, but there's been plenty of times when I've questioned my competence in lots of positions, including the current one. And I know there are lots of other people that had conversations with people about that. And it's this perception of an other that is somehow judging differently. And I don't doubt that there are experiences like that particularly for people of color. And it is those microaggressions, and it's that subtle racism that's really hard to pin down sometimes, because it can go either way. Is it me, or is it the color of my skin that's playing? Is this person prejudiced? Is this person a racist? What's coming into that? But I think the way the question was phrased before, it presumes that to be the truth, and it may be one person's truth, but it may be somebody else's, not their truth. And I think it makes it harder to have a conversation about how these things come up in the workplace, to be able to say, hey, I am feeling this way when you're doing X, Y, and Z, or when my white colleague doesn't get the same kind of feedback that you're giving me. And is it about me as an African American? And so that's sort of where I went with that question.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mike to tell his story. This might not be the perfect time, but that story is a little illustrative. And I try to restrain myself. This is a panel of guys, but I can tell you so many stories. I can tell you as a corporate vice president, I go to speak at an event, and people automatically assume that I won't do well. And there's no basis for that, until And then when I'm done speaking, there's a long line to get my business card. And the people are glowing. Oh, you are so articulate. You are so well-spoken. They don't say that to my white colleagues. At that level, it should be known that you are good at what you do. But for some reason, that is not expected of me. Or somehow I was not going to be. For one of the guys, I had to ask him, have you ever heard me speak before? He said, no. And I said, why did you assume that I would do so badly? And he became red in the face because he understood the implication of that question. And I can go on, there's so many nuances that I think many Black people who have any level of, it can tell you similar stories. People come to me and they think it's a compliment. They tell you you're well-spoken. I mean, what did you expect? It's not a compliment. That is not a compliment. That I can go on and on, but the multiple layers of this kind of, treatment. But Mike, tell him your story. I like your story. I want to hear it again.
All right. Well, you've asked me about 4 times now to tell you this story, so I guess I will. What she's referencing is I told her this story a while ago as an example of sort of like implicit white bias, and how on a particular instance it manifests itself in a glorious way. So the setting is I'm a young man in my 20s working at a power plant in Virginia. And I was an operator on a rotating shift. So there's 4 shifts and we work days, we work nights, and that typical deal. And on the shift that I was on, there was 7 people on that shift. And I was smack dab in the middle. There were 3 guys below me and 3 guys above me. And the 3 guys above me, my supervisor and both my control room operators, were Black men. The 3 guys below me that I was in charge of the floor were Black men. And then there I was in the middle, the only non-Black guy on the shift. So first I want to tell you that in the 30 years that I've been working, those years with those people were the best years I ever had in my work experience. We had more fun. We were great at what we did, and it was a beautiful time in my life. And those guys taught me a lot. They poured into me technically from a job perspective, but they helped me to understand a lot of what we're talking about. Because when you work a rotating shift and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and there's nothing else to do, you talk and you talk and you talk. And we would have great conversations. And so anyway, in particular, this one night we're working, and it just so happened that this contracting crew was coming in to do something. I forgot what it was they had to do, but they had to come in. A foreman and like a 10-man work crew was showing up at some point. We knew they were coming. And that night, because I'm out in the floor where the equipment is, I had to shovel up a coal spill that had occurred. And it took me hours to clean that up. And when I got done, I went up to the control room where my boss was and the 2 control room operators. And my boss is standing there in a pair of Dockers and a golf shirt. The 2 control room operators were in high back leather chairs and ball caps sipping coffee. They had sweaters on because it's cold in the control room. And I come in and I look like the Walking Dead because I am filthy, I am sweaty, I am smelly. I just got done doing 3 hours of shoveling coal. I'm so filthy that I sat on the floor. I didn't want to get the chairs messed up. So that's the scene. We're in the control room. I'm sitting on the floor just trying to kind of cool down and drink some water. And then in comes that foreman that we were waiting on to come in. Some guy we had never seen before comes in, some white guy. He comes in, he walks past the guy in the Dockers and the golf shirt. He walks right past the 2 guys in a high back leather chair sipping coffee. He walks right up to me on the floor and starts telling me, hey, I'm here to do the job. This is what I'm doing. I'm blah, 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 blah. He thinks I'm the boss. He just assumes that I'm in charge of these group of people. And we sat there, we all kind of just stared at him, and he gave me his download, and he's like, tell me what I got to do. I said, hold on, let me get my boss. I said, hey, Denny, this guy's here, he's got something to tell you. And that guy looked up, and then he kind of saw what was going on, and like all the blood ran out of his face, and he just, oh yeah, you know, and he played it off, and you know, he did what he had to do, and we just sat there like, wow, did that just happen?
Well,
like how does he walk past you guys to the guy on the floor, to the guy who's filthy, and assume that this is the guy I must have to deal with and talk to?
Simply because the guy is white. Again,
because I was the same color as him. And if I'd have told him, dude.
Mike, did we lose you? All right, this looks like Mike really got excited there, and he may have lost him. But I am telling you guys, that story is so typical. I can't tell you how many times that has been my story. I will go to lunch with my team, and because they were white guys, everybody will assume that they were the boss, and the waiter will cater to them until it's time to pay the bill, and they find out, oops, the Black woman is the boss. So what are we going to do now? And they're scrambling at the end. This is a kind of this implicit bias that automatically the white person is expected to be the person who is in charge. And we can go into more detail. Mike, sorry, welcome back.
Am I back? I'm sorry. I don't know what time you guys lost me, but
no, you were getting very excited, but I think we got the whole gist of what you were saying.
Yeah, so anyway, it's a great example of the bias that we're talking about. And I will tell you, that was a great group of guys, and we probably laughed about that for the next 3 years every time we brought that up. But that's real.
It is real.
You know, that stuff happens, man. It happened right in front of us.
All right, Mike, I'm going to have to cut you because, again, we're out of time. Bill Nordy, I ask you to kind of close us out, but we're going to reconvene this panel. Obviously, we have a lot more to talk about. We haven't even gone through, the issues that we have, but this is just, we're starting out here. Bill sent something out that I found to be extremely interesting about off to the races. So, Bill, can you talk to us and we can close out on that note?
Yeah, so that was a colleague of mine, Julian Mullins, who is the Chief Clinical Officer for Children and Family First. And he created this infographic that we can share that basically was a message to white people to say how you could begin to have conversations about race using RACES as an acronym for recognizing, affirming, and I thought it was a great way, because I do think white people have a hard time having these conversations because there's a fear of saying something wrong, and I think that's problematic in getting in the way of having these conversations, and I don't think it's fair for people of color to have to be the ones responsible for having these conversations. So if we can create some safe space and have some white folks take the initiative to have some of these conversations, I think we would all be better off.
Thank you, Dr. Bill, and we'll explore that and the call to action. I really enjoyed that. There were many things that you said there, including the one that you just said, white people getting involved and taking some responsibility. So it's not just the responsibility of the Black people, but there's a lot more that you said that I really find valuable, and I will hope that all of us can reconvene. So we are going to end the panel today because we are just out of time, but this is an important, very important topic because again, there's no point in having equal rights if you don't have the financial wherewithal to take advantage of it. It's just a sham. So we are going to continue to talk about it. And I do have good news for you all in our listening audience. We are close to convening a panel of police officers, district attorneys, and defense attorneys to talk about police reform and to talk about the administration of justice and the racial inequities in the administration of justice. So stay tuned. If we have everything tied up, I will do it next week and then reconvene this economic panel the week after. But if we're still working on the final details, then we will reconvene this panel next week. So again, stay tuned. That is very close now. And I'm so excited to be able to talk about that, because that's one of the key things that need to change in the way that the police acts towards people of color, and in the way that the administration of justice treats people of color. With that, I'm going to say we've come to the end of today's conversation. We are already over the hour mark. But great exchange today, great conversation. And we are going to be back again with this panel as soon as we can. Thank you everyone for watching us. Tune in again this same time next week, because we're going to convene this panel, a panel on racism, bias, and prejudice in America. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your views. Very, very important and very helpful to us in getting to a solution. God bless you and have a good night.